Good evening. We'll give a couple of you a minute to catch some seats, and then we'll get this evening going. First of all, my name is Shane Gettle, and I'm pleased to have been invited to moderate this event this evening. And I want to welcome all of you. An educated citizenry is essential to the proper functioning of a democracy. We've heard that before. It's true in general. It's also true with respect to the specific issues that we'll be looking at this evening. To start with, I want to emphasize this is a Bismarck-Mandan Chamber event. It's not sponsored by the city at all. We have two city staff here, but they've been invited as guests of the Bismarck-Mandan Chamber for the purposes that we are outlining this evening. And that purpose is to gather information and answer questions of the Bismarck-Mandan Chamber membership so that we as an organization can provide feedback on what the business community and our membership prioritizes and/or will support. So this forum is focused solely on road infrastructure needs, priorities, and funding, and we're not going to deviate from that topic this evening. We've invited the membership of the Bismarck-Mandan Chamber to pre-submit some questions, and we're giving priority to those pre-submitted questions. The questions have been refined, consolidated. If they were not deemed relevant to the topic, they've been cast aside, but most of you should find your question, that if you took the time to submit one, reflected in these. Once we get through these, if there's time, we'll end at 7:30 sharp, or until all questions have been exhausted, whichever comes first. But if there's time, then questions from the floor will be opened up briefly as well. You'll find at the end of each of the aisles there buckets upon which you can write your questions and then deliver them to Scott and to Ryan sitting right here at this table, and they'll sort them for me. And if they haven't already been asked this evening and they pertain to the topic, then we'll allow that to happen. With that, let me introduce the two gentlemen that we have up here this evening. First, we have Keith Hunke. Keith, if you give a wave. Keith started his career with the city of Bismarck in 1982, working as a laborer in the street department, and then later as a heavy equipment operator, shop foreman, purchasing agent, and eventually becoming the public works director in 1998. He was appointed assistant city administrator in 2006 and became the city administrator in April of this year. He holds a business degree from the University of Mary and a master's degree in public administration from the University of North Dakota. Keith enjoys outdoor activities, including fishing, hunting, and gardening, and he and his wife Dee have two adult children. Let's welcome Keith. And to Keith's right is Jason Tomanek. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Tomanek, sorry.
Close enough.
Tomanek, there we go. Jason Tomanek is a native of Bismarck, and he is married with two children. Olivia is 12 and going on 15, and Jason is 10. Jackson is 10, I mean. Jackson. Jason began his career with the city of Bismarck in 2006 as a planner in the community development department, and after 10 years in the planning division, Jason was recently appointed as the assistant city administrator in April. Jason has a bachelor's degree in environmental design, a bachelor's degree in landscape architecture, both from NDSU, and a master's degree from the University of Mary in business with an emphasis in project management. In his free time, Jason enjoys outdoor activities including mountain biking, hiking, gardening, disc golf, and coaching his son's baseball team. Let's give a hand to Jason for his participation this evening. And let me outline the rest of the agenda for the evening. First, we've invited these two gentlemen to give a presentation on the heart of what we're here this evening on road infrastructure needs, priorities, and funding. After that, we'll go into the Q&A. I will go through the questions that have been submitted in writing in advance, and like I said, if we exhaust these, then we'll take further questions. So without further ado, gentlemen, I'm going to turn the presentation over to you both for your presentation, and I'll be back up here when you're done.
Thank you, Shane. Get these mics adjusted here. We appreciate this opportunity to provide you information this evening And as was stated earlier, we're just going to be providing a bunch of factoids, and hopefully that will lead to some questions you might have, and we'd be happy to answer those the best we can tonight. We may come into a situation where we don't have the answers tonight, but we will definitely follow up and get answers to all questions. And very pleased to be here. Thanks to the Chamber. Looking forward to our additional forums that we'll be having in July. And with that, we'll get started.
Thanks, Keith. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your Thursday evening. I know it's nice and beautiful outside. Keith and I are looking at the river behind you and just realizing how tempting it is to be somewhere else tonight. So thank you for your time. We appreciate this opportunity. As Keith said, this is a wonderful chance for us to share some information with you. So we'll just get started here. Just a little background from the City of Bismarck's perspective. As Mr. Gettle mentioned, I spent 10 years in the Community Development Department Planning Division. The Planning Division is looking at not only current land use issues, but also long-range planning, both from a land use perspective and a transportation perspective. The first slide that you're looking at here is a map of the future land use plan for the City of Bismarck and the extraterritorial area. The point of this slide is not to go through the land uses and the functions of those land uses, but just to let you know that the city is looking into the future and how can we address the needs of a growing community? How do we help manage growth, guide growth in the right directions, and put complementary land uses together? The Community Development Department completed the Growth Management Plan in 2014. Part of the Community Development Department is also the Metropolitan Planning Organization. That is the division of community development that is looking at long-range transportation, not just road infrastructure, but also multimodal, whether it be transit, bicycle ped, or other means of transportation. The 2015 Long-Range Transportation Plan is a study that was just completed by the MPO. The purpose of that is just that. It's long-range transportation planning and looking at the needs from an infrastructure perspective, but also transportation and the roads that are leading to future developments. The slide that you're looking at here is a snapshot from the Growth Management Plan, the 2014 Growth Management Plan. What you're seeing here are a series of tiered growth areas. Primarily, the green area that you're seeing is the area that is essentially directly adjacent to city limits as we know it today. That green area is intended to service the next 10 years worth of growth. The pink area is the urban service secondary. Those are areas that are a little beyond the city's capacity for getting services to now. And then the blue area on the perimeter is essentially the extents of the city's jurisdictional area for zoning and development. So the long-range plan for the growth management plan is intended to service the next 20 to 30 years. This slide is something very familiar for anybody that's looking at transportation planning, but really what we're looking at here are the arterial roadways. These roadways and corridors are well known to all of us throughout the community. Just to kind of orient you, the north-south road, this is Washington Street. East and west, we've got Century Avenue, Century's here. Ash Cooley, 43rd Avenue here. You've got Centennial Road on the east. So this is just an indication of which roads in our community are functionally classified as arterial roadways. And really what the function of an arterial roadway is to carry high volumes of traffic throughout the community and have limited interruptions, limited intersections, limited access points, purely for the intention of moving traffic. You can see a list of just some of the arterial roadways in our community on the left side of the slide. The other functional classifications for roadways include a collector roadway, which are the roads more, say, like Calgary Avenue. If you're familiar with how Calgary Avenue functions east to west, it carries large numbers of traffic, but not the high volumes that you're seeing on, say, a Washington Street or a Century Avenue, things like that. And then the other functional classification for roadway is a local roadway. Those are the roads that lead you to the residential neighborhoods, the low-volume streets that are typically utilized by people that live in that area or have a very specific destination. But the purpose of, the focus of our discussion today is on these arterial roadways. but more specifically the future of arterial roadways and how do we build them, how do we connect to the developments as this community grows.
So back in February, we held a public input meeting in this very room, and at that time, we shared with you the 10-year plan for roadway capital improvements. Our former city administrator, Bill Woken, was tasked at the time to put together a 10-year plan, and he did that. He reached out to all the city department heads, and initially in that plan, we included all infrastructure, roadway, facilities, and it was quite large. And in February, we focused on just the roadway capital improvements, and at that time, you saw this list of roadways, arterial roadways throughout the community, some existing as rural roads, and some planned for future arterials. For purposes of discussion tonight, I took a narrower focus, and this is my focus, just so that we could possibly have a discussion of, in my opinion, what I think are community priorities in the next coming 5 years. And this list of arterial roadways includes 43rd Avenue, 3 segments of that. The first segment from Washington Street to State Street, then from State to 26th Street, also South Washington Street from the Stormwater Ditch to Burley Avenue, Century Avenue. On here we have noted Centennial Road to 66th Street, but more than likely based on current development in that area and things that we're seeing, things we're hearing from the development community, we don't necessarily have to reach all the way to 66th Street, but probably definitely to 52nd Street. So we're looking at an additional mile there east of Centennial Road. And Divide Avenue, likewise, probably not necessary to be going out to 66th Street in the next 5 years, but there's great potential to reach out to 52nd Street. The state has a section of land, it's Section 36, and it's really prime for development. It's just a matter of time to get the right combination together of investors and developers and to really break ground out there. Great potential for residential development, commercial development. There's opportunity to develop a great greenway to be incorporated into the city forest, the spruce trees that spell out Bismarck. So again, looking at the potential and also need of our community, we think that's really primed to go in the next 5 years. And then lastly, looking at the 43rd Avenue from 26th Street to Centennial Road. Again, when we look at the anticipated costs for the total plan of 10 years, it's $249 million. Looking at the 5-year plan, we're at $96,700,000. We had a lot of questions about how does the city fund its arterial roadway projects. In the past, we have relied heavily on the federal government, and we've been fortunate over the past number of years to get many millions of dollars from the federal government to basically use at our own discretion, of course, following some planning requirements from our state DOT. In up to 2012, we were receiving anywhere from $1.98 million to $2.15 million a year allocated from the federal program. Since 2013, that amount has increased, but there was a change in requirements that prior to that, we could save our allocation, and that's what we would do. We'd save for a number of years and have enough in the bank to fund our arterial roadway projects. We'd build a road. That's what we did for East Divide Avenue. It's what we're doing right now for North Washington Street. And anyway, we were to keep our own allocation, save it, and then build when we had enough to pay the bill. Since 2013, we've had to pool our allocations with our other MPO members, the City of Lincoln, Burley County, Mandan, and Morton County. So a little different approach. Within that MPO process, there's a technical advisory committee that will rank and rate projects and provide recommendations to a policy group. The policy group is made up of our local elected officials. They make final determination on how those federal dollars are spent through the MPO process. In the past, an example of use of state funds for arterial roadways would be State Street. When that was reconstructed, in particular the portion north of Interstate 94, that was part of a Highway 83, so it was considered on the federal system We did get some state reimbursement or state participation with that. Also, from time to time, we'll get additional state participation on our regional systems, if it's like a Bismarck Expressway or one-way pairs. And now to, what we're all familiar with, and hopefully you are too, is our local funding of arterial roadways. And what we do there is we use a combination of sales tax and special assessments along with the federal dollars to build those arterial roadways to fund and pay for the costs. As we all know, the federal dollars are becoming more scarce. Right now, Bismarck is allocated to receive federal dollars in 2020, 2021 time period. It's not a lot. It could be around $3 million. Given our recent construction cost for North Washington Street, that's around a $15 million project. We're going to be far short if we have to just solely rely on our federal allocation in 2021 for a future project. So we've touched on this before in some past discussions, whether it's been staff presentations at city commission meetings. You may have been involved in some of the chamber membership meetings or the BMDA membership meetings where we've presented funding options for arterial roadways. And we did some analysis on what a local fuel tax might need to be to fund local or arterial roadways. And this is all premised on how many dollars an additional penny in local sales tax currently earned. So right now we earn approximately $17 million a year on our 1 cent local sales tax. So to make that equivalent with a fuel tax, we'd have to charge anywhere from, and I see I have an error here, it's 72 cents to 98 cents per gallon on fuels that are sold in Bismarck. Big challenge with that, setting up that program, would be the administration of that and all of the infrastructure necessary to collect that tax would be a city cost. Right now, the state collects fuel tax on motor fuels, but they do it at the wholesale level, at the rack, where large volumes of fuel are being sold by dealers, and it's distributed through tankers and then out to the retail pumps. So we don't have or the state doesn't have a mechanism to collect those dollars or taxes locally here in Bismarck. Also, we looked at what would be an equivalent increase in local property taxes to make up $17 million. And based on what we are currently assessing for property taxes, that would be equivalent to a 90% increase. The other thing we looked at is a lot fee and a direct bill to owners of lots or owners of parcels. And right now we have about 21,000 parcels, individual properties in Bismarck. And to make the equivalent of $17 million on an annual basis, we would have to charge each lot owner $69 a month. And then we also looked at a fee that we would do a direct bill to developers of raw land. And in there we made some assumptions based on zoning density. And with that, we came up with that cost would be a one-time cost of $30,000 per lot. Oftentimes we get asked, so where does my property tax go? When I pay my property tax bill, who receives those dollars? So I looked at my own property tax statement, and out of the total I pay, a little over 41% goes to the Bismarck Public School District, a little over 24% goes to the city of Bismarck, a little over 19% to Burleigh County, and then just about 15% to Bismarck Parks and Rec, and just a minor amount to the state of North Dakota. Some other questions we get asked regarding our property tax is what is that spent on? So what you have in the screen there is a 10-year look back at the property tax revenue, how many dollars we collected through our mill levy assessment, and where those dollars were spent. And so you can see under the property tax expenditures, underneath here, these various categories. We spend monies in the general fund. Those are departments such as public safety, police, fire, our emergency 911 communications center, our community development department, engineering and such. Building construction, we have building needs where we're building new facilities. We will assess a mill levy for that, and you can see where the monies have been spent over the last 10 years there. Public transportation, we do a mill levy transfer to Bismarck Transit to fund our transit system. The library, they get a direct mill levy pass-through for their operations. Special deficiency, we need to levy on an annual basis enough money to pay potential default costs on our special assessment bonds. If we'd ever have a default, we're required to set aside monies to pay for that one-year payment of principal and interest on special assessment bonds. Then, of course, we have Social Security. We have to pay those costs for our employees that are in the general fund. And we have a mill levy there for forestry, weed control, and then employee pensions. We still pay for employee pensions, but we had a shift starting in 2014. We are now showing those costs in the individual department budgets. So if you pull up the budget for police or fire or engineering, there'll be a line item in there for their pension costs, where in years prior to 2014, we had it all lumps into one line item in the budget. Regarding our sales tax revenue and expenditures, again, here we have a 10-year look back. And I've said this to many people that I've had conversations about sales tax. One thing that I really need to point out is we have reached a period where we've plateaued in our collections and our revenues. So if you look at 2013, 2014, 2015, we're bouncing around anywhere between 17.2 and 17.4 million. In my mind, and that's significant. It's a plateau. What are the explanations? I think if we look around and see what's happening in other communities where they're doing some build-outs, they're getting some additional retail that maybe only was found here in Bismarck-Mandan in years past. And I don't know if we can call it leakage, but consumption spending habits have changed a bit, and that's where I think what is driving that plateauing of collections. The expenditures for sales tax, we have listed. The first item is our 25 mil reduction. The citizens of Bismarck voted in into our home rule charter the requirement that we will offset 25 mils of property tax with sales tax. The next line below that is snow gates. That is another item that our voters initiated, and it's voted into our ordinance, where we must use sales tax to provide cover the costs for our snow gate operations. Then you'll see in years past, we had shown expenditures for economic development. We haven't put any money aside for economic development since 2012. No new monies. They're working off their cash balance. If, in the near future, we were to have something big pop in our community where we needed some resources, that'll be a challenge. The fourth item there is the highway construction line item. That's where we pay for our arterial roadways. And below that is our commissioned special road projects. In there we have, in recent times, going back starting in 2008, we established special assessment subsidies for the various roadway improvement projects. These are rehabilitation projects and reconstruction projects. Many of you living here in Bismarck, from time to time, you'll have the street in front of your house milled, overlaid, resurfaced, chip sealed. In some of the areas where we have old armor-coated streets, the hard surface streets, you actually will see a reconstruction of those roadways. And so since 2008, we've been providing a subsidy to offset the cost of that rehabilitation work. This next slide, what I want to show there is the future, what we're anticipating for the future regarding our sales tax budget. And the yellow highlights, those are areas where if we were to construct new arterial roadways, that's where we'd put in the numbers to plug those gaps. But you can see now, given our current status, looking at our carryover cash balance, adding in what we're anticipating to collect this year, and then deducting our expenditures, we come down, at the end of this year, we're projected to have a $1.5 million cash balance. As we move forward and we do nothing with arterial roadways, you'll see over time we'll have some growth in our cash balance getting out to the year 2021, where we're projecting a $3.6 million cash balance. Again, benchmarking that against our most recent project, North Washington Street, $14-15 million project, we won't have enough cash in the bank to fund that project or a like project. Then the next slide, what I did for illustration purposes is to plug in those projects that I identified, in my opinion, which I think are the priority in the next 5 years. And you'll see in short order, we start plugging in 2018, $13.9 million to construct the first phase of 43rd Avenue, and then after that, plugging in South Washington Street, Divide Avenue, and Century Avenue. We run into red numbers. Those numbers are not good. That's a deficit. That's a minus. And city government, we cannot operate in a deficit situation. So for illustrated purposes, I wanted to show you this, but we can't do that. We can't run negative. So a big challenge for us today and ongoing in the future. Oftentimes we get asked, what are other cities charging for their local sales tax? So what you have in front of you is charts showing what our peer cities are charging, and you'll see Fargo, Minot, and West Fargo, they're all currently at 2%. And oftentimes we'll get asked, well, what are they using their sales tax for? They're using it for similar items as we are. They're using it for infrastructure. They're using it for roadways, using it for flood protection, using it to build out and expand their water treatment and wastewater treatment facilities. So they're the same as us. They're using a combination of funds to build their arterial roadways, whether it's sales tax, special assessments, or federal funds. With that, we're to the point of questions. Any questions on what we presented, please ask those. I know, again, the chamber is going to make available this to you. If you signed in the sign-in sheet, it's important to leave your email address there. They'll send information out to you on request and give you a copy of our presentation.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. With that, as I mentioned, we've got a set of written questions that were pre-submitted. We're going to go through these. I'd invite you also to back through your slides. If you hit one of these points in your slides, you may have answered the question, but let's go back and show exactly where you did that so that the persons who submitted these are zeroed in appropriately. So, first question. Are multiple construction materials and practices considered when planning an infrastructure project to ensure both durability and cost effectiveness?
Yeah, a quick short answer to that is yes. When we are in our design phase of arterial roadways, we do an analysis, a cost-benefit analysis of the various materials, whether it's asphalt or concrete, and so there is a determination made based on life cycle costs as to which material is going to serve us best.
Okay, second question then. In regards to road maintenance, could you please explain the decision-making process behind determining which streets have priority?
Sure. With roadway maintenance, priorities are based on a combination of things. It's traffic volumes, safety issues, roadway conditions, growth development throughout the community, and of course, funding.
Okay. Is there a pavement management system in place to help maintain the costs and longevity of the roads and streets in the area?
Yes, there is. The City of Bismarck Engineering Department is responsible for that program. We use a micropaver. It's a very sophisticated program. Every 3 years, we bring in a van that's full of technology. It'll drive our arterial roadways, and it does about a third of our other roadways, and uses cameras and infrared gadgets to note and determine, where we have failures, cracks, distress. That information then is put back into micropaver, and it uses a series of logarithms and computations and will develop a pavement score, an index rating for each segment of street that we have in Bismarck. And then we'll use that information to determine where we go with our rehab projects, where we need to spend our dollars when we're doing our mill and overlays and chip seals. And so very effective program. It really helps us to determine, where we can get our best bang for the buck that we're spending for road maintenance.
How is the existing dedicated sales tax funding used to construct new streets? And effectively, how does this subsidy work, and how do you apply it to the current projects?
We'll use a combination of the sales tax, special assessments, and federal dollars to fund projects, and I can give you the recent split on our most recent projects. East Divide Avenue, project costs approximately $10.8 million. At that time, we received $7.3 million from the federal government. We used $2.1 million of sales tax, and we had $1.4 million of special assessments. And the current North Washington Street project, with that, and this number is an all-in number, $17.74 million. That includes engineering, all of our testing, our administrative fees, bonding costs. With that, we had $10 million in federal funds, and that particular project, we were capped. The Fed said, you only get 10 million. We didn't get an 80% match. We didn't get a 90%. It was, you get 10 million, that's what you have. So we used $4.95 million of sales tax and $2.79 million of special assessments. And what we try to do, we try to use our sales tax number as our plug number to balance the cost that we have to assess to the residents. We looked at East Divide Avenue and looked at, what a typical assessment per residential parcel would be for that, and tried to carry that forward when we looked at North Washington Street, and we'll continue to do that just to bring some fairness and equity to the residents when we're having to charge them special assessment fees for the project. So just gives you a breakdown again, and Bismarck has been doing this for a number of years, both in the allocation of funds, the way we try to provide fairness and equity in those special assessments, and also the use of federal dollars, sales tax, and special assessments.
Okay, you've touched on this question, but I'll invite you to go back to the slides or reiterate your points. What federal funds are available to address infrastructure needs, and what are the criteria for accessing those funds? For example, is the city required to match the funds received?
I don't know that I have a particular slide. As I said in the past, our federal allocation, we're able to retain that for Bismarck-specific arterial roadway projects and save that money and then build when we had enough saved to pay the construction costs. Right now, we participate in the MPO program where our funds are commingled with our MPO participants, and there's a different decision-making process as to how those funds are spent. Each budget cycle, the Budget Committee will present a series of recommendations to the City Commission regarding whether it's our funding projects for highway construction or arterial roadways, the special assessment subsidies for rehab and maintenance projects. So not sure if I'm quite answering that question, but there, as far as the funding, it's a combination, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. Maybe if you want to reread that again, I might have missed it.
Yeah, so the question was what federal funds are available to address infrastructure needs, and what are the criteria for accessing those funds? And then also, for example, is the city required to match the federal funds received?
Right. We're using the word match. It's not necessarily a match dollar per dollar, but if we're given federal funds, we're required to pay the balance of the project costs. And likewise, when we are constructing federal projects, we have to follow federal design standards. So yes, there's some criteria when we're using the federal program, federal dollars.
During the 2015 legislative session, there was one-time oil impact funds that were allotted to political subdivisions, and Bismarck was a recipient of that. How were those funds deployed?
The allocation we received as being a non-oil producing hub city, I think that was the definition, was approximately $1.4 million. Those dollars have not been allocated by the City Commission. They have not made any decisions to spend those dollars. I'm anticipating, given the climate we're in today and anticipating some very robust budget committee discussions, we probably will be recommending that those funds be spent based on the needs we have, and I would expect that to happen this next budget cycle.
It seems that housing developments are building too close to existing roads. Example, South Washington Street and Burley Avenue, leaving no room for lanes to be widened in the future. So the question is, why isn't, that's the observation on this one. The question then is, why isn't the city more proactive, anticipating growth in these areas and building 4-lane roads?
I would be happy to answer that. I guess it may be a matter of perception. I'll just kind of speak to the area that's asked in the question, South Washington Street.
And again, for the audience, the example was South Washington Street and Burley Avenue.
Yeah, Burley Avenue, yeah. So this currently is what we would call a 2-lane rural section, meaning it's nothing more than pavement and a rural ditch. There's no curb and gutter, there's no sidewalk, not the typical urban street. The right-of-way for a future build-out of Washington Street actually is there. The right-of-way is necessary, it is dedicated when the property is platted by the landowner. Dedication of, in this case, South Washington Street, I believe, is 125 feet of right-of-way. We're certainly not using all 125 feet of that, but as that road develops further into, say, a 3-lane section or a 5-lane section if needed, you'll also see sidewalks, boulevards, oftentimes multi-use trails incorporated within that right-of-way. The right-of-way is set aside up front. It's not necessarily implemented or utilized until the need for those roads to be built to urban standards is in place. So I guess I'd say that's more of a matter of perception, but we do actually plan for future build-out all the way through.
Okay. When determining the priority ranking of a project, what factors are taken into account when placing one project higher than others? How do you score these things?
Sure, it's a matter of a variety of factors, particularly proximity to adjacent developments, particularly developments that'll generate higher volumes of traffic, commercial centers, large multifamily developments that we know are going to have a high number of vehicle trips as opposed to, say, a single-family neighborhood that's got a much less of an impact on the roadway systems. Another thing that we look at, of course, is connectivity between other roadways. Is there a gap in the system, or is there a way to close the hole in the donut, so to speak? We also look at traffic counts, vehicle movements, the necessary right-of-way that would need to be dedicated. Federal funding, of course, is part of that. And then going back to the transportation studies and the long-range planning, what the city would anticipate that area would develop as, or what those needs may be.
What contingencies are in place if a consensus to infrastructure funding cannot be reached? How do we address our infrastructure needs?
Okay, let's see. Let's go back. So if we go back and we look at, and I'm making an assumption, the question, and as we said, on topic roadway infrastructure, we have available, and the City Commission makes decisions on an annual basis regarding our budget, but we have available our sales tax, and if consensus, it's reached through a process each year when we present budget recommendations and the City Commission makes approval of that final budget. But the areas they'll be working with are listed here. The things they cannot change, of course, are those items that were voted in by the citizens, the 25 mil reduction, property tax reduction, and snow gates. The other items, they could make decisions and realign and reallocate subsidies for the special assessment projects. That's really what's at play. Again, based on what we know, what we've estimated as future costs for our arterial roadway projects, we need many millions of dollars. We know that the federal dollars aren't going to be available till 2020, 2021, and given the amount that's projected, that falls short of our needs we have today. So the contingency plan is, to balance the needs with our available funding.
Please compare the traffic capacity and construction costs for a 3-lane rural section for 43rd compared to the construction cost for the urban section being constructed on Washington Street. Let me read that again so everybody's tracking the same here. Please compare traffic capacity and construction costs for a 3-lane rural section for 43rd compared to the construction costs for the urban section being constructed on Washington Street.
Okay. I guess to answer the first part of that question, capacity, there should be no significant difference between an urban section and a rural section. The biggest difference is what you see on the periphery of the roadway. As I said earlier, a rural section is typically without curb and gutter. So it would be a ditch section where you've got culverts and drainage through the swales on the sides of the road. The urban section is one where we're more typically used to seeing in the city, where you've got sidewalks, boulevards, curb and gutter to help deflect or manage stormwater. Those become the more significant costs when you're looking at constructing an urban roadway. As Keith mentioned earlier with the North Washington Street project, we're looking at about $10 million per mile for a concrete roadway urban system. The cost on an urban road, on a rural section is significantly less because you're not adding curb and gutter, you're not adding sidewalks. Oftentimes stormwater is allowed to just flow openly through the swale or the ditch section. There can be a difference in cost when you're looking at areas, say, on the north side of town where we've got fairly defined drainage patterns versus on the south side of town where we've got a lot less topography and a more difficult time moving stormwater into the right areas. When you get into these flatter areas with less relief and less opportunity for natural drainage, then costs build when you have to construct stormwater systems to manage, capture, deflect, and flow all the stormwater that's there. So the biggest cost comes to the type of roadway, but back to the original answer, with capacity, there should be no marked advantage with one roadway over another.
Have we collected info from surrounding cities and states to see how they fund these projects? So Fargo gets mentioned often as a city that seems to get out in front of infrastructure development. So what kind of homework have we done regarding what our neighbors are doing in other comparable cities in the country?
I took a look at our peers and what I consider our peers, City of Fargo, Grand Forks, and of course we always look across the river to Mandan. And again, as I said earlier, all the cities are using a combination of federal dollars, sales tax, and special assessments. In Fargo, they have a series of infrastructure taxes that were put in place. Originally, they had a penny. Then after that, in 2010, they voted in half a penny for flood control. And then in 2013, they voted in another half a cent for infrastructure. In Grand Forks, we have a combination of sales tax, special assessments, and the federal dollars. In Mandan, talking with City Administrator Neubauer, they're doing much like we're doing. combination of sales tax, special assessments, and he said also from time to time they will do a general property tax levy to help fund their arterial roadways. Haven't really gone out and taken a national look. Stayed within what I consider our peer cities are here in the state.
Okay. We have some, that actually exhausts the written pre-submitted questions. We have some questions that have come in already here from the audience this evening, so I'm going to start with those. Based on the comments about the 2013 change to sharing funds with the MPO, it sounds like Bismarck is in a worse position for financing projects. Was the creation of the MPO a federal requirement? How is or can that scenario be improved to put the city in a better infrastructure position?
The MPO process, yes, is a federal program, a requirement that we're a participant. What changed, again, was the change in allocation and who was in control of the allocation. Prior to 2013, as I said, we were able to keep our allocation, save it, and dedicate it solely to a Bismarck project. Since then, our funds are commingled, but there is a very good process that's used through the Technical Advisory Committee and then recommendations passed on to the policy group. And again, when you look at the needs of all of the MPO communities, we will never, ever have enough money through the federal system to build those, to accommodate those needs. So they do their best to make a collective decision on what's good for our MPO region. It's a change, it's a required change, and we're doing our best to function within the regulations and process that were given to us.
What conversations have occurred across taxing entities to address these concerns and the financial impacts on residents in taxing jurisdictions, if any option is pursued?
The particular item we're talking about tonight, arterial roadway infrastructure and funding, this is, my involvement with it has been really just amongst city staff, people like you here today who are interested. We haven't crossed lines and had any formal discussions with the other taxing entities, school district, parks, county. Looking at the responsibility for funding and building arterial roadways is a city responsibility, so we've been taking the lead and trying to tackle this ourselves.
What other capital improvement projects beyond roads does Bismarck have on the horizon that may impact residents? Example, buildings, wastewater, waste treatment, etc.
It seems like it's an ongoing, continuous process when we look at our treatment facilities, our freshwater treatment plant and our wastewater treatment plant. We're fortunate, those are utilities. We do have a sustainable funding mechanism established through our rate system, and also we have through the state revolving loan fund program, we have access to state dollars to help us fund major expansions at both of those plants. My opinion is those areas we're in very good shape, and again, it's because there is a sustainable financial plan, there's sustainable resources, financing resources through our rate system and also through the state grant program. We have various facility needs, growing community. We have a growing need for new fire stations. We do have a new fire station project on the books. We're looking at relocating our current station out east of 26th Street, the Sleepy Hollow Station. That's within our time horizon of the next couple of years. We also have some facility needs, whether we're looking at the City Hall, looking at our event center. All of those we address, again, on an annual basis through the annual budget recommendations that are provided to the City Commission, and they have final approval on what is funded. And also we will keep those projects in line and also adjusted through our capital improvements planning process. Again, with that, we reach out 5 years, whether it's water or sewer projects or our facility projects or arterial roadways. We show through that 5-year capital improvement plan, what our needs are. What we're talking about tonight, of course, with arterial roadways is that funding gap we have. Those other areas of infrastructure were in, I would say, better shape, in particular in our water and sewer utilities. We will have an ongoing challenge with facilities like our city hall and the event center, but we continue to work with what we have in those areas.
Okay. Gentlemen, that's the questions I have up here. Are there any others sitting in the back yet, waiting to come up front that you've written out? Okay. Well, there was one given to me just before I came in this evening, and I didn't run it through the staff, so I'm just going to go with it here. A man walks into a bar carrying a piece of asphalt under his arm and says to the bartender, "I'll take 2 shots of whiskey, please, one for me and one for the road." So there we go. All right, let's give these gentlemen a hand, please. All right. As part of the process here, as we close, I want to announce that there will be a follow-up survey of the members of this organization. And if you've not already provided your information in the lobby, please do so in leaving. The sign-in sheets are available on the tables. That'll get you on the list for the follow-up survey. Make sure that you're there. Also, if you would like to receive a copy of the City of Bismarck informational presentation, you can email info@bismarckmandan.com, and they'll reply back with a copy of the presentation for your purposes. So with that, thank you for coming out tonight. We competed against some great weather out there. I know I've been looking longingly at the river the whole time, but again, thank you also for taking part of your evening to be here as well, gentlemen. Let's give them another hand. And that concludes everything.